There we go. All right. Well, welcome, General. It's good to have you back on my podcast. It's been a couple of years, I guess, since we came on, and you've got a brand new book out called "War Without Rules." And is it kind of a continuation or sequel? How would you categorize it compared to Stealth War?
Well, I mean, actually, and thank you. I'm glad to be back. It's actually a not a sequel. It's more of a prequel. As you know, Stealth War mentioned a book that two PLA, People's Liberation Army colonels, which is the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party, not the National Military of China. They don't have one. They just have a party army. Two PLA colonels wrote this book called Unrestricted Warfare, and I mentioned a lot in Stealth War. And the problem with Unrestricted Warfare is it's if you pick that up, you know, it's a good thing that if you're an insomniac and you can't sleep at night and you pick that thing up and you start reading, you're going to go right to sleep. So, but it's so important, and really, those guys were very prescient in kind of thinking about where internet was going to go and how globalization was going to enable them to spread political warfare, you know, globally, that I wanted people to be able to see in their own words what they said without having, you know, all the complication and boring parts of it. So it's streamlined, and it's in some parts it's reordered, so it actually makes more sense and flows better. But in essence, it's what the Chinese military doctrine is for, you know, how you turn the everyday into a weapon.
Yeah, so they wrote that mid '90s is when that came out.
98, and our so the CIA has a part of it that just translates open source documents, so stuff that's they're available to the public. So they're the ones that translated it. And so in 1999, which is the first time I saw it, that's when I read it. That's when it comes out and is available for, you know, English speakers.
Now, these two colonels were from, from your accounts in the book. I haven't read Unrestricted War. I have read War Without Rules, which, by the way, I recommend it to anybody. But they were like really ahead of their time. Their vision was extraordinary, as best I can tell from the book. What do you suppose gave them that insight? What's the background? What made them, or are these just two really sharp people, or is there just a fundamental different look that, or I don't know, philosophy or whatever you might want to call it in the CCP military?
Well, I mean, there's been deep thinkers in warfare, and one of them was Billy Mitchell, our own Air Force. Of course, he was Army Air Corps, got court-martialed for fighting for an independent Air Force, and really he believed in the power of airplanes to be a weapon of war. And he was the one that came up with the idea of bombing a battleship and sinking it. And so they put bombs on airplanes and they sunk a battleship. And before that, it was believed to be, you know, by the Navy, that battleship could not be sunk by an airplane. And so, you know, he fought for this idea that the airplane could be this tremendous weapon of war. So, I mean, there's people that have just can kind of basically have a vision for you see a tool and you're like, I could use this for, you know, this use. And in the case of the internet and globalization, these two PLA, they're actually Air Force, they're not Army, Air Force lieutenant colonels, realized that the internet and globalization, in terms of, you know, your ability to affect the everyday lives of people, it was going to have a massive impact. And if you could do that in a way that created an advantage for you, that would be a very important, you know, weapon of war. And so I think they're just like Billy Mitchell, or in there's another Italian, Giulio Douhet, who believed in the airplane as a weapon. So I think it's just, you know, it's natural that you have people that just can see, you know, and quite frankly, they're more oriented around political warfare. Again, PLA is a political army. party army. It's not a national army like the United States. They're less about force and more about politics. And so their understanding of politics, and in particular how money impacts political influence, I think really made them able to see, like, it's not surprising to me, knowing how they think about the world, that it was them and not us that understood the power of the internet and globalization. It's the way that they fight. We fight with weapons, they fight with politics. And if you fight with politics, that means you fight with money. And that's really, I think, why they were able to be so forward looking.
So in the last couple of years, how much do you think the folks in the Pentagon have gotten up to speed, and the things that we talked about 2 years ago from stealth? Are they up to speed? Are they getting close? Is it people better a little more aware?
No, I mean, look, the Christian Bros wrote a book called The Kill Chain. He worked for John McCain, and The Kill Chain is actually a pretty good book. It talks about the fact that the smartphone never made it into DoD as a technology. So all the technology that supports the smartphone never made it into DoD as a technology. Cloud, I mean, we're still working on joint warfighting cloud capability, which is a follow-on to the JEDI contract. We still haven't even completed that. Software as a solution in DoD is antiquated, slow, then when you talk about the day-to-day, logging into a laptop, sometimes it'll take you half the day. Sometimes you can't even log into it. So the technology we have in terms of IT, information technology in the DoD, not only does it not help on the battlefield, it's just absolutely atrocious when you're back in garrison. So Christian Bros writes about the fact that we'd never been able to embrace this innovation from Silicon Valley or Boston or Austin or any of the other tech hubs here in the United States in the Department of Defense. We have things like Defense Innovation Unit and all of these programs that are supposed to create innovation. But ultimately, when it comes to acquiring these things and helping the line military be more effective or efficient, that hasn't happened. But the whole point about the kill chain is we need these technologies to be more effective on the battlefield, to be more efficient killers, to be able to put more steel downrange on the right target. This is not the idea behind unrestricted warfare.
Sure.
Has nothing to do about, armed. I mean, they do talk about armed force, but it's primarily about how do you use the everyday to create an outcome in your favor without having to resort to force. That is something that the DoD absolutely is not focused on. They are focused on where do we put a weapon, and what are we trying to achieve with that.
So what do you think the answer to this is? Would it be a complete fundamental restructuring of military, or a merger of a number of government agencies, say a Commerce Department, State Department, and military, and some sort of unified type of command structure, or at least focus?
Well, one of the things that you have in the military, particularly in the officer corps, but also in the enlisted corps, is what's called professional military education. And so all along the way in my career, I had to read, I had to go to courses, I had, things like squadron officer school. I had, Air Command and Staff College, had Air War College. So in Air Command and Staff and Air War College, those are year-long training programs to basically understand the fundamental principles of war, doctrine, all of these things, joint war fighting. I think one of the things that we could do to help ourselves is to basically take a lot of the stuff that we have in terms of, Clausewitz and Jomini and Duhet, and actually bring in some Machiavelli, bring in some Sun Tzu, bring in some, unrestricted warfare, so that we understand that, the battlefield is not just, on the one where we are deploying weapons. It's one where we're deploying finance. It's one where we're deploying economics and trade and ideological influence. It's one where we're using social media. I mean, all of these things, if you think about it, a well-placed tweet can be as powerful as a bullet. particularly, depending on what it causes. And this is the thing that the Chinese Communist Party understands. It's something that we don't understand. So I think it starts with professional military education, but we also have to embrace it in terms of doctrine. Now, at the National Security Council, there's the National Economic Council and the National Security Council. National Security Council, when I was there, we were saying, hey, this is a national security issue. The fact that the Chinese are influencing our corporate sector is a national security issue. The fact that companies like Huawei are taking advantage of telecommunications infrastructure, that's a national security issue. The National Economic Council, which is more aligned with the Department of Commerce than the Department of Defense, it's like, no, that is not a national security issue. It's just an economic issue. And so the Chinese Communist Party fights in that seam where we, the Commerce Department and DOD is fighting over the fact that, hey, this is a problem, and really not the DOD, but people that see it as a problem are trying to bring the DOD and Commerce together to get them to work together on these things. And that's the other thing. I think, at the National Security Council, we can recognize that the elements of national power include weapons in the DOD, they include the Treasury, they include Commerce, they include the State Department, they include all elements that the federal government can bring to bear against our adversaries. But it also includes the corporate sector. It includes our university system. All of these things work together to promote our interests and our values in a globalized world. And to the extent that they're not, or that they can be basically used as proxies for our adversaries, which is what the way they're used today, means that we are not defending ourselves in the right way. And so that, I think, between professional military education, getting the National Security Council and the National Economic Council working together, and the departments and agencies, as well as with the corporate sector and the financial institutions and academia, if we can all get on the same page about what is national security, then I think we can be much more effective.
One of the things we discussed the first time was how you became a pilot and the influence that the original Top Gun had. And of course, I think we were anticipating it coming out about 2 years ago, but for whatever reason, it's now going to come out on the 27th. But one of the things that I noticed, there was an article somebody pointed out in one of the trailers that on the patches on Tom Cruise's jacket, two flags have been altered, both the Japanese flag and the Taiwan flag that was on the original one, but now they've been kind of messed with so that they're no specific state. And that kind of, it's subtle, but it's also very, very powerful. The influence that the Chinese have over our media, of our films. And I mean, and it's my understanding that that's a film that was, heavily controlled by the Pentagon. I mean, there's no way you get that much access to that much hardware without having some, major strings. Yet there was apparently no issue that they had with, those subtle changes, and those are just the ones that are easy to point out. So, I mean, how do you move forward through, that invasive of and that minute and subtle of an attack? And,
well, I mean, that's a good example of how they're using our corporate sector against us. It used to be that Hollywood, Coca-Cola represented American values and represented American principles. Now they represent Chinese Communist Party principles. And the reason is because they want to sell movies in China. So in order to sell movies in China, we have to change the message. Nike tennis shoes, the NBA. I mean, what all these things that used to promote democracy, as kind of, American institutions going out into the world, what they represented, the values of America just by being. Now, they are been so, I would say corrupted by Chinese Communist Party money that, the values that they're promoting China. And particularly sci-fi movies, those are really good at, saying that the Chinese come to the rescue, in just about every sci-fi movie that's made today, it's the Chinese that are saving the world. So, and that's again to appeal to the Chinese audience, to get the movie to be sold in China, and that's they control. There's there's no counter here in the United States. We don't say, hey, put that stuff back on. We just basically are hands off. Well, if we're going to be hands off as a nation, Chinese are absolutely going to come in and say, well, this is the message. This is a subtle message that we want viewers to see. Well, what does that mean? It means that everything is portraying China as a better society. And one of the things that they're saying today is, in fact, I tweeted it out today, COVID is a political thing. It's not a science thing, because they think that if they show that they can be better at COVID by lying about the data, for instance, they said they only had 4,600 deaths. If they lie about the data and say that it's because we're a totalitarian regime that we stopped the virus, that other nations will say, we need to become like China. In fact, you hear people like Justin Trudeau saying, yeah, we need to be like China. So it's a very powerful strategy and doctrine.
Yeah, and I do not see a clear path to to really combat that. I mean, the reality is there's more people that watch movies in China probably than here in the US. And I'm not the kind of person that says we should legislate things like that, but yeah, we got to find some way to cope or to counter it at the very least, or see what we can do to.
Well, I mean, here's the question: who on behalf of who is Congress making policy? Is it supposed to be on behalf of the American people, or is it on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party? Because if we don't do something about it, when policy gets made in DC, it's getting made on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. Because what they're doing is they're just going to the corporate sector and say, this is what we want you to do. When they were trying to block Huawei, who was coming to DC and telling them not to? The chip manufacturers, right? Mm-hmm. All the people that want to sell them, subcomponents. That's who was lobbying on behalf of Huawei. So when you think about, what's the purpose of Congress? What does political independence and sovereignty mean? If the Congress is not making policy on behalf of the American people, and in fact, they're making policy on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, and the reason they're doing that is because these companies want to sell into China, well, then we've lost control of our political process, and we are no longer an independent nation in the way that we think. We're not free, because the policy that comes out of Congress is not meant for us. It's meant to support the Chinese Communist Party. So when we think about national security, why do you have a military? You're supposed to have a military to protect that political independence and sovereignty. Mm-hmm. So the political process is supporting the American people. And that's the whole beauty of unrestricted warfare. It's like, you don't need a military. We'll go right at your political process and we'll turn it around. So rather than supporting the American people, it's supporting us. And that's the beauty of the strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly insightful strategy, and it's it's clearly worked. And I know some of the things like lawfare, the way they attack us with our own laws, the economic warfare, clearly, cyber warfare, even the terrorism. I mean, yeah, it's just amazingly effective. And still, Stealth War came out about 3 years ago?
Yeah, October of 2019.
Yeah, and then you were in the halls of the Pentagon and the White House hollering about this for years before that, and we still. I think there's a better understanding of what China has been doing amongst the American people, but no outrage.
Well, you look at there's an Economist article just came out talking about the commerce secretaries, mm-hmm. and their business ties to China. Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democratic administration, the people that are being selected to be the Secretary of Commerce have economic and financial ties to China.
Yeah.
So who are they working on behalf of? When we say that we're not going to, put a company on the entity list because the Secretary of Commerce says we don't want to do that, or we say, hey, we're not going to, do something against a Chinese company, and you have the secretary with a relationship, with a financial relationship with China. I mean, to me, doesn't that seem like a conflict of interest? I
Sure.
mean,
Yeah.
so but we keep hiring these people. Same in the Secretary of Treasury, right? Yellen.
Yeah.
She's getting money from Goldman and all these other banks after she left the Treasury, and now or after she left the Fed. Now she's in the Treasury, and guess what? She's bringing all those relationships with her. So everybody on the business side of the federal government is beholden to China. So when the national security side says, "Hey guys, we've got a problem," they're like, "No, we don't." And it's just business. And so this is not, it's, until we get to that part where we understand that the people that we're hiring in these agencies actually have a financial incentive for pulling in the direction the Chinese Communist Party wants, we're never going to get past this. We're just not. That's why it's so effective.
Yeah. Well, let me shift gears slightly because I know we have a few more minutes. But the 20th National Congress of CCP is coming up later in the deal, and I wanted to get your opinion on the lockdowns in Shanghai. Are they? I mean, the later variations of COVID have not been particularly tough, at least here. Is this a different variation of COVID, or is Xi using that as an excuse to crack down and to solidify his hold on power going into that Congress?
Yeah, I think it's, I've had a hard time trying to figure out what they're doing. They're getting ready for a war with Taiwan, and they're just seeing how far they can take it. Is it so that they can make sure that they don't have any kind of ruckus prior to that Congress? They talked about Li Keqiang, not Li Keqiang. Who was it? Anyway, the premier, I think, talked about the fact that they think it's and I tweeted about this. And I was just saying that it's a political strategy. It's China's soft power to show how much better we are at coronavirus. Except, we've moved on, and mostly there's herd immunity. People are going to get COVID like the cold now, right? You're going to get it every year. It's just going to happen. And so, it's going to be part of our our immune system. So what are they doing? I think it's some combination of those. Is using it as soft power. Hey, look how good we are at controlling COVID. Using it to control the population so that there's no disruption of the 20th Party Congress. Using it because they want to see how they can control the population if and when they invade Taiwan. I don't think it's an if, I think it's a when. So I think it's some combination of those things. It's ultimately COVID policy is really about control.
Now, how do you think the U.S. will respond if they were to invade Taiwan?
Well, I think it's going to be something like the Berlin airlift. It's going to be resupply and evacuation. It's not going to be war. We can't go to war with China over Taiwan because they have nuclear weapons. We create the risk of having a nuclear China, which is not something that anybody wants.
Yeah. And so, do you think maybe an invasion of Taiwan would then finally get some outrage in this country and fire people up?
I'm sure there would still be people saying, just it's their deal, Taiwan's theirs, let's not mess up business for this, for this thing. So, I think there's people, look, money and power and control are all things that people strive for. So we can't expect that, people are not going to do those things because that's human nature. But we have to control for that. And, as a nation that believes in certain principles and values, either we, fight for those principles and values, or we get consumed by our greed and need for power and control, which is instead of, us leading the world now, it's slowly becoming more and more China leading the world. And that means it's becoming more and more authoritarian, if not totalitarian, which means that no American is safe because over time, as the world becomes more in that vein, that those nations will exert pressure on the U.S. political system to become more in line with the way, which is why we created the international order. We wanted to push our principles and values rather than having, the others pressed on us. This is where, what we face.
So there's been some recent articles about Xi maybe having an aneurysm. Now, clearly nothing comes out of China that's not controlled. So what do you think is behind that? Is that a signal that he may be having issues with power, or is it just some other diversion? What do you think in that case?
I don't believe anything that comes out of China, particularly as it pertains to the party. The party is notoriously secretive, and much more so than Russia is. I mean, you saw the intelligence leaks that were happening. I mean, our ability to look into what's going on in the Chinese Communist Party is nowhere near what it is with Russia. So no, and the other one they're saying that the Ukraine said is that Putin has cancer. Who knows about all this stuff? I don't think anything's going to happen to Xi. I think he has total control over things, much better control than say Putin does in Russia, because they've got all the internet and everything locked down, and the propaganda is just out of control in terms of what people believe. So even if the Chinese people know that they're being fed a line, they don't even know where that line begins and ends. So in a lot of ways they may know that they're being fed a line, but they don't know what the real truth is. And in many cases most people just go along with what the party tells them.
Well, we've only got a couple more minutes, and I wanted to touch on this. Your new technology venture for various entities. Tell me a little bit about that and how important that is for what's going forth. And what was the name of the company?
It's called Semper, and the website's semper.ai. And basically what we built was so here's a challenge. We have infrastructure that's vulnerable to EMP attack. It's vulnerable to cyber attack. So we wanted to create infrastructure for our telecommunications and cloud that were hardened, like military gear, but not super expensive. And then we wanted to protect the data that was inside. And so we created this technology to do that. The things that supports are the ability to do, rapid processing of data at the edge. So things like cameras, we can, process that data in real time. The other thing that's starting to happen is the rollout of 5G, so we can build 5G infrastructure. And when you think about the problem of operational security in DoD today, you can go on every single military base in this country right now, and you can buy data on the open internet that allows you to know everything that's going on that base, and it's because of all the data that's being collected on the smartphones that are on that base. So what we try to do with our technology is get between the cloud and the device to be able to protect that data, particularly for sensitive sites like military bases. But also we want to protect the data for individuals, going forward. So we're focused on resilient infrastructure, secure data. We think that data is the most important resource in the world, not like oil in the 20th century. It's really data today. The Chinese do too, by the way. We think that data ought to be secure. And in particular, when it comes to privacy, your data ought to be controlled by you, and only you should have the ability to dictate how that data is used. That requires that you build infrastructure that actually that can do that. So that's what we do. We build the infrastructure of the 21st century, and it's really based on edge compute and 5G.
And so, who would be your customer for that? Typically, is that would a school or a pretty good sized business, or does it get down to small business level, or is that not? Where is your?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So, we could work for, we could build towers for a carrier, right? Like an AT&T. We can build infrastructure for a school. Now, that school becomes only one customer on that tower, because once that tower is built, it can serve other customers in the local area. It can serve businesses. It can serve first responders like police or firemen or medical institutions. So the same way that the cloud serves many customers today, these are local clouds that are hardened and secure for the community. So, once we put that first tower in, it may be just have one customer on it, but we think over time that more and more customers will migrate to that because they want connectivity, they want broadband, they want, their data secured, and they want those applications that run at the edge to give them that real-time performance.
Okay. Well, General, I certainly appreciate your time. It's always wonderful to talk to you, and I can't give enough praise to both of your books. And other than the fact that the information that you give us is not really fun to hear, I look forward to your next book.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.